Welcome to the Rise Up For You podcast, where thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and executives from around the world share their practical tips, strategies, and stories to help you unleash your potential and achieve your goals. Your journey of growth to become your best starts now.
Hi, I'm Netalina Nasruddin, the CEO and the founder of Rise Up For You and the podcast host of the Rise Up For You podcast. We have another amazing guest for you today, but before we jump into our show, I want to remind you all that our show is completely ad-free and commercial-free. That's right. We want to make sure that you get full access to this podcast interview without any interruptions. So I have just a really small ask for you. We would be absolutely honored if you can share this podcast, send it to your family, your friends, your coworkers. Help us get the message out for this podcast because we are bringing you amazing interviews every single week with executives, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders that are here to help you become your absolute best. Share this podcast with anyone that you think would love to listen to it. Don't forget to subscribe and like so that you can get access every single week to the episodes that we're bringing straight to you. We appreciate you, and without you, this podcast would not exist. Okay, what do you say? You ready to jump into today's interview? I'll see you there. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rise Up For You podcast. This is your host, Netalina Nasruddin. Thanks for joining us today, and very, very excited to have yet again another amazing guest, Kim Crowder. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Rise Up For You podcast.
Thanks for having me, Netta.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump in, we always love the audience to get to know our guest. And so we would love for you to brag a little bit. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got to this point.
Sure. My background is in marketing and communications. That's, you come out of college with this idea that that's what you're going to do because they tell you you have to make that decision right at that age. When in fact, I did work in that world for a long time and since have pivoted into courageous leadership work. I'm from Houston, Texas. I've worked in healthcare. I've worked in sports entertainment. My organization has worked with organizations like HarperCollins Publishers, for instance. We've worked in tech, and I've also been featured in multiple media outlets, including CNN. And where I'm most passionate and the reason why I'm doing this is because of my experiences as a woman, as a Black woman in the workplace, and really wanting to redefine this idea of leadership that I think the way that we've been talking about it for years, as I imagine you feel the same way, Netta, is outdated, right? People want something different in the workplace. And not only are they wanting it, but we're really seeing a demand for a redefining of what leadership is. And so my call for leaders is greatness in the way of being courageous. And we define that in a myriad of ways. But the biggest thing is that we work with leaders on that coaching and that learning and development side in order to operationalize this into the workplace.
Yeah, and we're very much in alignment because we do very similar work. But I'm curious to learn more about, I'm sure the audience as well, was there an epiphany? What was the moment that you decided I'm going to leap from corporate into becoming an entrepreneur, specifically at what I would call like an impact entrepreneur, because you're focusing on elevating people? Like what was that moment? Or maybe it was a number of things that kind of added up. I'm curious on that journey there.
I got fired. I got fired. And let me just say it this way. It was a continuum of really experiencing the workplace in ways that had become harmful for myself mentally and emotionally in a lot of ways. So the role before I was let go, I said let go, right? Because it was a very short term, but the role before I was let go, that environment, I was for a long time the only Black executive. And being in that space as a new leader, being, at that level, what came with it was more than I could have imagined in many great ways, right? I was able to make some amazing decisions. And also I watched what can happen to women of color in environments where leaders are not not only receiving the proper learning and development, but also aren't being held accountable for what they're learning, not knowing how to implement that into day to day. I saw the legal aspects of what that turned into, but I also saw the workplace culture of how that played out, and I saw that show up in a PR crisis. And that place is still recovering after many years. And they also lost just about all of those executives except for one. So that's millions of dollars. We can go on and on about that piece. So that was really what it was. And then what led me to say, okay, let me start a business, was that being let go and going, okay, now what's next? Because I didn't feel like my best use was inside corporate America anymore. I was outspoken. I was really clear. I was strategic about the ways that I wanted to see leadership change. And sometimes in corporate America, it best serves you being on the outside to come in as a partner.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so you made this transition, and I want to talk a little bit about courageous leadership, which is something that you discuss quite often. And so tell me a little bit about that focus. Why specifically leaders? What about being courageous, and how can that make an impact in the workplace today? Because it is a need. It's still a need. Like I said, my team and I are in the trenches every single day with corporations and executives, and I'm still, I would say, shocked or baffled by the amount of leaders that are leading teams and people that have a hard time communicating, having confidence, speaking up, doing the right thing, putting people first. I mean, of course, I understand profits are important too, but really, really just taking ownership of the fact that they are leading people and making an impact.
Well, two things here. One is that organizations are spending 1% to 5% of their revenue on leadership development, right? That is just a general statistic. And I mentioned that statistic because there's a lot of investment that's happening in that space, but not always this checks and balances of, is it sticking? And so one of the things that I have seen is sort of like, go out, do this learning and development, but we have no expectations of what that looks like. Also, on the flip side, when we start to go up the corporate ladder, what we find is that executives are often not receiving their own level of learning and development. There's generally this assumption that just because you're put in a position of leadership, that you know what that is. And that changes based on the organization, right? Each organization has a focus on what the business goals are. It has a focus on what is that culture. It also has a focus on what do we want the impact to be, this year all the way out to 5 years later, and not giving executives and leaders the strategy around the ways to show that, to make that show up in impact for team members. So I'll give you an example. I remember we worked with an organization and we did learning and development. This is like ideal, one of your favorite clients. I'm sure, Netta, you have one of these clients where you're like, I hit the jackpot with this one, right? Where we worked with them on learning and development. We also did some auditing around some of their processes and systems, and to watch that team go back and turn that into day-to-day activity. So they redeveloped some guidelines. They redeveloped how they train new team members into that department. And what was so powerful is that they were able to take what they learned and teach it, but in real world, right? Here's what it looks like in the real world. Here's what it looks like in implementation of the work that we do to over 100 other leaders in the organization. Now that's a return on investment of 150%. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about impact, because now you can talk about, these are the ways that the learning and development actually shows up, but also you can hold that accountable. And they also had an experience where they said, hey, Kim, if we had never worked with your team, we might have walked into a PR crisis because we would not have known what to look for. And so the reason why I think about it in terms of what it means to be courageous is because oftentimes you are leading in a way that is uncommon. So we talk about those soft skills. So much of what is pushed in the workplace is just bottom line, but it doesn't take into account that your retention rates impact your bottom line. Your turnover rates impact your bottom line. Your employee satisfaction, their ability to be productive, but also their ability to be innovative. All of that is attached to how your leaders lead. And so that is why I'm most passionate, because one, I don't believe that any team member deserves to walk away from a workplace less than who they were when they came in. But also what I hear from leaders when we walk into one of the things that we do when we do a workshop is we ask leaders, hey, define courage for us in one word. Everybody has a different idea what that is, but it's usually brave or bold or outspoken. And then I say, think of one or two leaders that had the most impact on your professional journey. What were one of the, give us one word for the skill sets that they have. What do they say? What do you think that they say? They say things like they were a great listener. They were an advocate. They supported me. And so we want to marry, right, this idea of what it means to be a leader and show folks that you can do both and you can leave the people that you serve better than they were before you got there.
Curiosity question that I have for you is, when you're working with these leaders and you're teaching them about courageous leadership, what would you say, besides being bold and some of the things you stated already, what would you say are like 2 or 3 things that courageous leaders have to be prepared to embody or to have?
Yeah. The first one is being culturally and self-aware. That's a big one. Our workplaces are becoming more dynamic than ever, whether we're talking about generations, whether we're talking about where people are sitting, whether we are talking about how people work, are people neurodivergent? And so not just only in identity, but also geographically, right? And so leaders really now have this major task of opening up their own worlds so that they can communicate and work with their team members in ways that are effective, ways that their team members can actually receive. And that could be different based on the team member. That second piece is really understanding how to advocate for both yourself and team members. And the reason why I say both yourself and the team members is because sometimes you can have a leader who's really great at advocate or managing up, right? Connecting with their leader, but they don't always know how to bring that down into their team members. So they may be placating to the leader above them and leaving the team members who work under them kind of high and dry. We've seen that happen. And then that leads to lack of trust in those work environments. And that third thing that I would say is, as leaders are thinking about business goals, what are the skills and necessary, what are the necessary skills and culture that can uphold what the organization needs to accomplish? Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we talk about leadership in that way, right? We sort of talk about leadership as, especially when you get in that executive space, you're always talking about bottom line. But what we're not asking from those executives is, great, if you say you all are going to merge the organization in the next 6 months, does your team have to be resilient? And what does that look like? And how you develop your leaders now so that when it's time to do that, they have the skill sets in place so that you're not losing half of your employees, or so that the work environment becomes tumultuous when you merge with another organization.
Yeah, and even just having a succession planning around the leaders. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, Kim, but most organizations that we've worked with, whether they're Fortune 5 corporation or a small nonprofit, haven't even thought about building the next level of leaders. And so if there is a leader that leaves, there's a huge gap, which then creates a lot of stress, a lot of tension, and also a lot of time, money, and energy. One thing that I want to ask you, because this is something that's a question that we get asked often, and even myself, I think about this, is more and more the workplace, as you mentioned, is shifting and it's changing. At what point, or where is the line where a leader has to pass the ownership onto the team member? Meaning, leaders are to empower, to help coach, to help mentor, to provide clarity, to communicate. But there's also, I would say, a pretty large percentage of team members that struggle with performance. They struggle with motivation. There's things going on in their life. They're at the bottom level of the Maslow's hierarchy. And so they're just going to work every day, trying to survive. And then you have this leadership team that's trying to make them higher performers to drive profits. What's the line of coaching and mentoring? And okay, like as an individual, you need to figure it out yourself and bring to the table the value to the organization.
I think that is, at least for me, that's not a catch-all for me as far as I can give you a flat answer. And the reason why is sometimes that is it could be driven by a mismatch of, um, of, I wouldn't say skill set per se of team members, but a team member just may not thrive in your work environment, or they may not thrive based on how you lead in particular, where they can go to another team and shoot to the top, right? And so what I believe, one of the skill sets that we don't often think about for a leader is to identify whether or not a team member is a best fit, not in this cultural fit where they have to act a certain way, they have to show up a certain way, but really, can they thrive in the work environment that you created? But instead of letting an amazing team member go, can you do one of two things? Would they be best used in another way on that team, right? Is maybe the job, the way that it sits currently, is not a fit for them, and have you asked them that, right? Do they have the space to recreate roles if necessary in the ways where they still get the job done, but maybe how that looks could be different? Or are they a best fit in another part of the organization, for instance? Are those options available? And so when you talk about how much a leader should coach a team member, I think some of that really just depends on that environment. What kind of time do you have? Can you bring on a partner who is better served to do that and help you build trust with your team members first? And then you can come in and, sort of take that torch over. So there's a lot of ways that could fit, unless we're talking about a specific work environment where we're assessing what that looks like in particular. It's hard for me to have like a hard say on what that is, but I do know that leaders have to be available first to finding out whether or not what does that team member love to do? Are they doing that, right? In that team, is there room for them to do that? And if not, then what? And does what doesn't always have to be that they have to exit the organization. It just may mean some reshaping and reframing, either in that role or somewhere else in the organization.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as I'm listening to you talk, leadership really, I would say, is like 2 degrees. I come from the background of education, and so I often compare the two. You can have an educator who's brilliant in math, right? But maybe the skill of teaching isn't something they've been able to master or embody. And so they're not able to teach or get the students to the next level as they need to, right? And I kind of look at leadership the same way, which I think can feel maybe very overwhelming for leaders. It's like, okay, you are an expert in your craft, but the skill of leading and coaching and mentorship is also like a 4-year or more degree. Like the ability to have the emotional intelligence to look at your team member and be able to identify, okay, maybe there's something that's not in alignment. Like that skill and capacity to even just understand and read people and read a room is also like a skill and a technique in itself. And what's interesting, you said 1 to 5% of companies that's how much they'll invest, based off of their revenue. And also we see that most corporations, around only 20% of corporations actually invest in leadership development. So you have 80% that are leaders, but have never cultivated or understand, like, how do I lead? How do I coach? How do I mentor? What does this look like? What would you say is like step 1? Like before you do anything, if you're in a leadership position right now, or you want to get to a leadership position, start working on this.
Find a mentor, find a sponsor whose leadership you love, and then start to learn from them. That's probably the easiest way to learn, because the truth of the matter is that great leader that you're looking at probably wasn't that great when they first started. Because we all are going to make mistakes as in leadership. We've all been taught that leadership is about dominance and power, instead of the very things, Netta, that you and I are talking about, around the skill set of being able to really connect with people and be able to guide people. And so the biggest thing I want any leader to know, whether they're executives or senior leaders or mid-level managers, is that it is a skill set and that it can be learned. And so
Yes.
if you can take that pressure off of yourself, to instead of saying, I just don't have it, it doesn't come to me naturally, and understand that these are skill sets that can be learned, that is probably the biggest thing. And then find someone who is willing to teach you, at least at baseline level. And then I'm just going to give a bonus: ask for that leadership development that you want. Ask for it. Like, if you want a coach, or if you want to go through a certain cohort or course, if you want to become a part of the courageous crowd as part of, from Kim Crowder Consulting, ask for it. Ask for those dollars so that you are starting to build that muscle and learn how to lead in ways that you can feel good about at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. Kim, thanks so much for this conversation. We could probably talk for another 30 minutes. I have a couple more questions for you. I want to jump into the power section of the interview, but from one performer to another, I got to hear a little bit about your background. I know that you sang, you did musical theater. I also did the same. Talk to us a little bit about that. Was that like way before when you were younger? Are you still doing it? I have to learn more about your performing side.
Yeah, I started, gosh, how old was I when I started singing? I think I might have been in the second grade. I had always sang, but where I first sang in front of a group of people was about the second grade. And just, it became a part of who I am. It's not even a was. I sing during speaking engagements, during keynotes. We use music as part of a learning and development tool, because what we know is that people connect music to memories. And so if we can provide and use the music as a way to be a cornerstone and to create a deep a mental connection, right, with something that we're sharing, then we use music as part of that. It's also why I use it in keynotes. Now, I have not done any stage work in a long time, well, probably since before COVID, but I do take voice lessons. Again, I sing when I do keynotes. It's just a part of who I am.
I love that. And I can probably assume, because I know for me that being a performer has highly elevated my social and emotional intelligence, like just reading a room when I'm singing or being on
Yes,
stage in the
yes,
past. Yeah.
absolutely. That's probably one of the most powerful pieces about being a performer, is that you can read the room. Even virtually, you're able to read the room, but also you're able to connect with people at a higher level, because you're used to sort of exchanging energy with folks on a regular basis when you're a singer. And I would say also you're able to tell stories in ways that connect with people.
Yeah.
And I think storytelling is such a big part of learning and development. Storytelling is such a big part of being a keynote. And so having the benefit of having a performance background, you can do that in a way that is both compelling to an audience, but also in a way that is entertaining as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would also say captivating the audience and pivoting, being on stage.
Yes, that's a big one.
Seeing that the energy is not working and you're like, all right, I got to do something.
Yes. Yes. But, and you know what, also, Netta, I would say that you learn very early, if you are a musician, especially if you are a musician like where you play with a live band, you're usually playing with a lot of men.
Yeah.
And so as a woman, you learn command pretty early, not just with those musicians, but also the audience. You have to command a room. You have to, say to a room, it's time to be quiet, or I'm going to change the whole emotional atmosphere in this room right now. But also, if it's not quite working, hey, we need to throw in that song. We need to sing it earlier in this bit, or pause and let me just talk to the audience for a minute and get them involved. So you're right. It really does create the ability to be innovative and spontaneous in any moment, so that the audience walks away with feeling elevated, feeling like they were able to connect and that they got what they paid for.
You got an experience. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for letting me take you down that road. Okay, power section of the interview. I just asked some rapid fire questions. We always say, if you were to leave the world with one final message, we call it our golden nugget. What would your golden nugget be?
Oh, my golden nugget would be, make your goal to leave the world better than how you found it.
Yeah. And we're very big on values here at Rise Up For You. And we have values for our company, of course, and then each of our team members have values that are non-negotiables to them. What's a non-negotiable value that you have that just no matter what happens, this value is a must?
Integrity, that I'm always operating in a way that honors my integrity, but also honors the integrity of the people who I'm in community and in relationship with, including boundaries. Because the more that I honor my boundaries, and that's really hard as a woman. Women are not taught that boundaries are okay. And so as you honor your boundaries over and over, what you find is that when other people have boundaries, you don't have a desire to push it because you can relate as to why that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have one more question for you, but tell us a little bit about where we can find you. I know you're on LinkedIn, which is great. I connect with you on LinkedIn, your website, all the goods.
Yeah, LinkedIn. Find me, Kim Crowder, on LinkedIn. We'll soon be starting some LinkedIn lives. Ned, I might be calling on you at some point to do a LinkedIn live. And also, you can sign up for our newsletter, for our insider at kimcrowderconsulting.com. Go to the contact page and just sign up for the newsletter.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kim. And final question, as you know, we are Rise Up For You. What comes to mind for you personally when you hear that phrase?
It's always going to be courage for me, because I feel like every day we have the opportunity to, in some way or another, to test our courage, to stretch that muscle of courage. Again, courage is a muscle that we stretch. And the more that we do it, the more we get more comfortable doing it. And then the more that we can empower others to do so as well.
I love that. Kim, thank you so much for joining. It's been an honor to have you on the show today. We'll definitely have to have you back because we can talk for another few hours, I'm sure. So thanks for joining.
About the performing alone. Just
yeah, I know. We should do a podcast as how performance relates to soft skills and leadership because it's so connected. But
it very much so is.
Yes. Thank you, Kim, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into the Rise Up For You podcast. It's an honor to have you here, a part of our community. Every single week, we are bringing you new episodes with thought leaders, executives, entrepreneurs from around the world that are here to help elevate you and your potential. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Kim.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel and check us out on social media. We are everywhere from LinkedIn to Instagram to Facebook at our simple handle at Rise Up For You. On every single platform, it's exactly the same. And we're providing new content on every single platform. So there's something different everywhere. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our podcast, and connect with us on social media. I'll see you next time.